So this morning I would like to begin with a riddle. I know that some of you will know the answer. If you do, please don't share it. It must come with warning. It is not the most upbeat story, but I hope you can approach it as a sort of a game and try to solve it rather than focusing on tragic details of the riddle. This is the riddle. A father and his son are involved in a serious car accident. The father sadly dies at the scene, and the son is rushed to the hospital. In the operating theater, the surgeon looks at the boy and says, "I can't operate on him. He's my son. How is this possible?" It's a riddle that has puzzled many people, despite its very, very simple answer. When I first heard it, I could not solve it immediately. If you think you know the answer, please raise your hand. Almost all, but some people still don't know. So the answer to this riddle reveals something, I think, important about our society. How deeply rooted our assumptions are, and how slow real change can be. You will say, of course, it's so obvious and simple. How could I not see it when you learn the answer? So the answer is, of course, that the surgeon is the boy's mother. And yet, the fact that this still surprises many people speaks volumes. Even today, in an era of supposed equality, many of us unconsciously associate positions of authority and expertise with men. This is not because we are bad people, nor because we consciously choose to think this way. It's because change, particularly when it comes to our ways of thinking, takes extraordinary amount of time. So science too supports this position. Our experiences change us physically. Researchers studying inherited trauma have found that trauma does not simply vanish in time. It can be carried forward, encoded within our mind, brain, body, and DNA. It means that it is passed down through generations. The wounds of our ancestors don't disappear. They shape us in ways we often don't even realize. There is the second message of this book, that you don't have to be defined by it. It's there to learn something about you, to understand yourself, but you don't have to react in the ways that your trauma or the trauma of your ancestors that direct you to. But if this is true, as research suggests, then what happened to Jewish people during the Holocaust changed us genetically for many generations. Likewise, what happened to Israel on October the 7th changed Israelis and many of us. And the ongoing trauma of the destruction and devastation in Gaza and the West Bank is shaping the generations of Palestinians. Healing these wounds will take much longer than we think. In Judaism, we find many echoes of this idea. Let's take the Song of the Sea as an example. On the one hand, it's a moment of pure euphoria, a people freed from centuries of oppression, 400 years of oppression and slavery, their former masters drowned in the sea, and yet there is an unspoken side to this song. It took Judaism a very long time to consider the Egyptians in this story. There is an extraordinary midrash, rabbinic legend, that offers very different perspective on this moment in the Torah. At the time, the ministering angels at the time when Israelites sang this song, the Song of the Sea. The ministering angels desired to recite a song before the Holy One, blessed be He, and God said to them, my handiwork are drowning in the sea, and you dare to recite a song before me? This legend presents a profoundly different approach to this week's portion. The Egyptians were the oppressors, and yet they too are called God's children, God's handiwork. By saying this, God acknowledges both the necessity of freedom and the path to freedom and the fight for freedom, and the tragedy of human loss. The biblical text originates in the 12th century BCE, before the Common Era. The Talmudic story is attributed to Rabbi Yochanan, a scholar of the 2nd century of the Common Era. It took us almost a millennium to consider the other side. Change, when it's real and meaningful, is not immediate. It takes time, sometimes longer than we can imagine. And yet, the fact that we may not see its fulfillment should not stop us from working towards it. Let's take the life of Moses as an example from our tradition. He was a man who led his people out of slavery, who stood before Pharaoh, who received the Torah on Mount Sinai, and yet he never entered the promised land. He never saw the result of his work. For years, I saw this as one of the great tragedies in the Torah, a leader who sacrificed so much only to die on the threshold of his dream's achievement. I see it differently this year. Moses never saw the land, but he did something even greater. He set the path for others to walk. His leadership was never about personal fulfillment, but about something far more significant, planting the seeds of a future he would never personally witness. Traditional texts tell us that Moses knew he would never see the result of his leadership, but he took the responsibility anyway. We live in the world of quick solutions. Our shopping is delivered in one day. Our bills are paid with one click of a button. And we can have answers to all or almost all our questions within seconds online. As a result, we learned, or being taught, to expect any change to happen very quickly. Unfortunately, this is not how social change happens. The work we do today, the conversations we have, the biases we challenge, they may not have meaningful outcome in our lifetime, but that doesn't mean they are in vain. Just as inherited trauma can carry across generations, so too inherited progress. We stand on the shoulders of giants from the past who paved the way for us. The freedoms we have, the opportunities that are open to us today, the rights we enjoy today, were once dreams and visions, unfulfilled and unachieved. Perhaps this is our task. We must do the work knowing that we may never see the final outcome. The fact that change is slow doesn't mean it's impossible. On the contrary, precisely because it's slow, we must act now, today. I want to live in a world where people celebrate the release of hostages in Israel, a world fighting against terrorism, but at the same time feeling deep pain for the suffering caused by Israeli army in Gaza, the West Bank, and Lebanon. I want to live in the world in which we grieve knowing that humanitarian aid was not delivered in time, the world in which we hope for lasting peace in the Middle East and everywhere in the world, and look with anger and frustration at politics, at Israeli politics, especially the self-serving group of nationalists as extremists within Israeli government today. I want to live with hope at the prospect of peace, dreaming of a world where our families and friends in Israel no longer need to use their bomb shelters. Not the world in which we dread the prospect of the forceful displacement of Gazans. I want to live in the world where suffering is not a competition, where people are not blinded by anger and trauma, a world in which we see people where others only see enemies. Achieving such a world will take a long time, maybe generations, possibly centuries, and this is precisely why we need to start building it today. In a world where conflict and suffering persist in many parts of the world, let us be voices of empathy and understanding. In a world where people build walls, let us build bridges. In a time when hope seems fragile, let us be the builders of a future where peace and compassion are not just dreams. In a world that demands and supports a strong hand, let us be the voice of those who are afraid and who show vulnerability. In a world that demands quick and easy solutions, let us be the voice not afraid of complexity and nuance. Shabbat Shalom.